I want you to put yourself in a really specific, highly sensory situation for a second.
Okay, I'm with you.
So you are sitting in a window seat on a commercial airliner.
Best seat on the plane, honestly.
Right, exactly.
Uh-huh.
And you are on your final approach into LaGuardia Airport in New York City.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a very specific approach.
It really is. And, you look down out of that little oval window, and if you have ever flown this specific route, you know the exact view I am talking about.
Because the water is just right there.
It is right there, the water of the East River and Flushing Bay. It's so close, in fact, that as the plane descends, the runway seems to, rise straight up out of the water.
Yeah, it's a genuinely thrilling, almost unnerving approach.
Unnerving is the perfect word for it.
Because you are skimming the water and the surface tension feels like it's just, inches below the landing gear, and then suddenly, boom, concrete.
Right. It's this massive optical illusion of modern aviation. But here's the thing, and this comes to us from the compiler of today's source dossier.
Nick McKenzie.
Yeah, Nick McKenzie. He's a frequent traveler. He's flown that exact route into LaGuardia more times than you can count, right?
Yeah.
And while researching the history of the airport, he experienced this massive realization, just this jolt of understanding that completely shifted how he views the ground beneath his feet.
Which is what we're going to get into.
Exactly. Because that runway, the one that seems to magically float on the edge of the bay, it is not just a piece of standard airport infrastructure.
No, not at all.
It's actually a reclaimed garbage dump and a tidal mudflat.
Which is just wild to think about when you're landing on it.
It is. And it was built almost entirely by hand, like shovel by shovel, wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, by a workforce of some 11,000 relief workers in the late 1930s.
Which is just a staggering image when you pause to really visualize the sheer mechanics of it. I mean, we are talking about modern commercial aviation.
Like huge planes.
Yeah, these incredibly heavy, sophisticated machines touching down at hundreds of miles per hour on a foundation that was quite literally built by human hands hauling dirt.
Hauling dirt over garbage.
Exactly.
And that realization, that forms the mission for today's deep dive.
I love that mission.
Because we are going to trace an ordinary day of travel for you, the listener. We want you to think about the physical network you interact with every single day.
The stuff you don't even notice.
Right. The road you take to get out of your neighborhood, the stone bridge you cross on the way to the highway.
The storm drains.
Yeah, the storm drains carrying water away from the tarmac, the runway you land on, the terminal you walk through.
All of it.
Our goal today is to examine the source material and realize just how many of those surfaces, like the very physical backbone of our modern lives, were built by a single massive program.
The Works Progress Administration.
The WPA.
Yeah. And to really grasp the scale of the WPA, we have to look at the nationwide aggregate numbers from the dossier.
Because the numbers are basically the story here.
They absolutely provide the structural framework. So between 1935 and 1943, this single agency laid down or improved over 650,000 miles of roads.
Which is just an astronomical figure.
It is. And they built or rebuilt roughly 78,000 bridges.
Wow.
And on top of that, they constructed about 800 airports and landing fields.
The dossier actually highlights that 650,000 miles of road is enough to wrap around the Earth's equator 26 times.
26 times! Let that sink in.
Yeah. But instead of just looking at the sheer distance, the sources emphasize the volume of material.
Right. The physical stuff.
Exactly. We were talking about millions of tons of gravel, crushed rock, and asphalt, all sourced, transported, and laid down within an 8-year window.
Mostly by hand.
Which is the crazy part.
Yep.
So today we are taking a chronological journey through this massive mobilization. We're going to start with the initial desperate relief efforts of 1935.
The absolute depths of it.
Yeah, and we follow the engineering and the politics all the way to the physical legacy that you are likely driving or walking on today.
And most importantly, we are going to look at the mechanics of the how and the why.
Yes. Because how they physically built this infrastructure and the economic philosophy dictating why they built it that way?
It challenges pretty much everything we assume about efficiency.
Completely. I mean, the concept of efficiency is totally inverted in this context.
It is entirely upside down. To understand the how and the why, you have to really anchor yourself in the reality of 1935.
Right.
The Great Depression has this absolute stranglehold on the country. Unemployment is hovering at catastrophic levels. People are desperate.
Breadlines, mass evictions, the whole thing.
Exactly. So the WPA is created with 3 highly ambitious layered goals: relieve, recover, and rebuild.
Okay, relieve, recover, rebuild.
Right. Now, historically, the recover part is generally considered a failure, right? Because the WPA didn't end the Great Depression.
Yeah.
The massive industrial mobilization of World War II is what ultimately did that.
Sure.
But the rebuild part, the physical alteration of the American landscape, that was a sweeping, undeniable success.
And the notes in our dossier focus really heavily on that rebuilding phase, and specifically on the man running the entire operation.
Harry Hopkins.
Right, Harry Hopkins. His personal philosophy basically serves as the engine driving the methodology of the whole WPA.
Yeah, and you have to remember, Hopkins wasn't an engineer.
No.
He wasn't a construction magnate. He was a social worker who rose up to become one of the most powerful administrators in the federal government.
Which is a huge distinction.
It's the most important distinction.
Yeah.
And his core, unshakable philosophy was summarized in this four-word mandate. Work, not a dole.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because a dole being, the contemporary term for just a simple cash handout, right? Direct welfare.
Exactly. Hopkins believed down to his bones that simply handing an unemployed person a government check was spiritually and psychologically crushing.
Like it robbed them of their dignity.
Right. He argued that people didn't just need capital to survive. They required the dignity of a paycheck that was actually earned through physical labor.
They needed to feel useful.
Yeah, they needed the routine of waking up, leaving the house, and actually contributing to the physical improvement of their own community.
And the economic analysis in the sources is fascinating here because it points out that just giving people cash would have been infinitely easier.
Administratively, yes. 1,000 times easier.
Right. And significantly cheaper for the federal budget. I mean, if you're just mailing checks, you don't have to buy shovels.
You don't have to hire foremen.
You don't have to secure land rights or draw blueprints. But Hopkins insisted on providing paid work.
He was adamant about it.
And that brings us to what I found to be the absolute most fascinating mechanical detail in the entire dossier. It is the deliberate, calculated choice of structural inefficiency.
Yeah, this is where it gets really counterintuitive.
Because when you look at WPA construction methodologies through the lens of modern civil engineering or, even the engineering standards of the 1930s, it appears highly, highly irrational.
It looks completely backwards.
Right. The agency deliberately and intentionally selected hand tools over heavy machinery.
They actively chose the slower option.
Yeah. The guidelines mandated the use of shovels, pickaxes, and wheelbarrows over motorized graders and excavators.
The sources even detail protocols where concrete had to be mixed by hand on large wooden boards using hose.
Which sounds exhausting.
It's grueling. Rather than bringing in motorized, rotating cement mixers, they just had guys with hose on wooden boards.
And on paper, that sounds like a massive step backward. I mean, by the mid-1930s, the construction industry already possessed advanced technology.
Oh, absolutely. They had steam shovels, heavy motorized tractors, pneumatic drills.
Right. They had the capacity to move massive amounts of earth quickly and efficiently. So the federal government looked at a modern, mechanized excavator and essentially banned it from the worksite.
Banned it entirely.
In favor of, 500 men with hand tools.
Because the logic only makes sense when you understand Hopkins' primary metric for success.
Right.
In a standard private construction firm, the metric is return on investment, right? It's like, how fast can we grade this road? And how cheaply can we pour this concrete? But the WPA's primary metric was entirely different. Their metric was, how many idle human beings can we put on a payroll today?
I was trying to map this onto a modern equivalent, just to understand the mechanism of capital versus labor output.
Right. How do we contextualize that today?
So imagine a tech company that needs to process a massive data set. The most efficient way is obviously to write a script and run it through a cloud server.
Right. It takes 10 seconds and costs like pennies.
Exactly. But if the company's actual goal is to employ 10,000 out-of-work accountants, they wouldn't do that. They would print out the entire data set on paper, hand every single accountant a calculator, and pay them to process the numbers by hand.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that perfectly illustrates it.
It takes 6 months, the administrative overhead is a total nightmare, and the financial cost is astronomical compared to the server. But if the purpose was to distribute wages and keep those accountants from losing their homes,
the inefficiency becomes the entire point of the exercise.
Exactly. The WPA was applying that exact logic to physical infrastructure.
The mechanism of inefficiency was a designed feature of the program. I mean, consider the physics of road grading.
Okay.
If you bring a massive motorized grading machine onto a rural road project. That single machine, operated by one highly skilled driver, might move the same cubic yardage of earth as 50 men with wheelbarrows in a given day.
Right.
In the private sector, that is a triumph of productivity.
Sure, you're saving a ton of money on wages.
But for the WPA, it meant one man got a job driving the grader, and 49 men were sent back to the breadline to starve.
Man, when you put it like that.
Right. The mandate was to maximize employment density on every single project site.
Yeah.
So they banished the motorized greeter.
So every single mile of those 650,000 miles of road represents this massive, deliberate concentration of unmechanized human exertion.
It's incredible to think about the physical toll.
It really is. Now, I understand the macroeconomic logic of distributing capital through wages, to stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
But the dossier includes some fierce contemporary criticism.
Oh, yeah. Very fierce.
And I think it's important to look at that pushback, right? Because if I am a taxpayer in 1936 and I drive past a WPA worksite, the optics are terrible.
Why, look awful.
Right. I am watching a crew of 100 men take 3 weeks to dig a drainage ditch that a rented backhoe could have finished before lunch on a Tuesday.
Yeah, it looks like a complete waste of time.
Exactly. And the term boondoggle actually features prominently in the historical documents, specifically tied to this era. Critics were infuriated that federal tax dollars were being burned on intentionally slow labor.
There are even syndicated political cartoons mocking WPA workers for, leaning on their shovels.
I've seen those.
Yeah. The criticism was intense, it was sustained, and frankly, from a purely fiscal standpoint, it was entirely accurate.
Sure, strictly financially speaking.
Right. The phrase boondoggle became weaponized to attack these exact methods. The argument was that paying men to do the work of a machine was a fundamental waste of federal resources, and that the slow pace of the work invited malingering.
People just slacking off because there's no rush.
Exactly. The image of the idle worker leaning on a shovel became the prevailing conservative critique of the entire New Deal.
So how did the administration defend the mechanics of this? Like, when Hopkins is hauled into a congressional hearing and accused of burning taxpayer money by actively avoiding mechanization, what is his defense of that methodology?
Well, the defense rested on the brutal reality of the alternative.
Okay.
The administration basically presented a two-pronged counter-argument. First, they pointed to the tangible output. They were like, yes, the methodology is slow, but the physical infrastructure of the country is undeniably improving.
The roads are actually getting graded.
The retaining walls are being built. It's happening. Second, and far more critical, was the human element. Hopkins argued that the alternative to this inefficient labor wasn't that these unskilled workers would somehow find jobs in a robust private sector.
Because there wasn't one.
Exactly. The private sector had completely collapsed. The real alternative was mass starvation and the complete collapse of social order.
The inefficiency was essentially the premium paid for social stability.
That is the core takeaway right there. If you evaluate the WPA strictly as a construction firm, it was arguably one of the most inefficient firms in American history.
Terrible return on investment.
Absolutely. But if you evaluate it as a crisis intervention mechanism designed to keep millions of families alive while simultaneously extracting a permanent physical dividend for the public,
Then the calculus changes entirely.
completely. The labor-intensive hand tool methodology was literally the only way to absorb that sheer volume of unskilled labor.
But the physical limitations of that methodology raise this really fascinating engineering problem.
Oh, definitely.
Because if your entire workforce is built around hand-mixed concrete, wheelbarrows, and pickaxes, you are inherently limited in what you can build.
You can't build everything that way.
No. You cannot construct a massive suspension bridge or pour the foundation for a giant hydroelectric dam using men with hose mixing cement on wooden boards.
The sheer physics and material science of curing concrete wouldn't even allow it.
Right. So what were they actually capable of building?
The sources spend a significant amount of time addressing this exact limitation. And this is where we really have to clarify a major historical conflation.
I'm glad you brought this up because this confused me too at first.
Yeah, when people look back at the New Deal infrastructure, they tend to mash all the alphabet soup agencies together.
Right.
The dossier points out that the most common and really most fundamental error is confusing the WPA.
The Works Progress Administration.
Right, with the PWA, the Public Works Administration.
And I found the distinction in McKinsey's notes incredibly helpful because this WPA versus PWA mix-up really obscures the actual engineering achievements of both programs.
It does a disservice to both, honestly.
It does. So let's look at the PWA first. The Public Works Administration was run by Harold Ikes, who, interestingly enough, was a fierce rival of Harry Hopkins.
That definitely bumped heads.
Yeah. And the PWA is responsible for the heavy engineering titans. Like when you picture the colossal, iconic monoliths of the 1930s.
The Hoover Dam.
The Hoover Dam, the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, the Grand Coulee Dam, that is all the PWA.
Right. Because the mechanical and administrative differences between the two agencies were absolute.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, the PWA did not operate as a direct employment relief agency in the way the WPA did. The PWA functioned more as a massive federal financing mechanism.
Okay.
They would identify colossal infrastructure needs, allocate the massive amounts of capital required, and then they hired private engineering and construction contractors to actually execute the designs.
Oh, I see. Which means those private contractors were not bound by the hand tools only philosophy of the WPA.
Not at all. Because the PWA used private contractors, those firms naturally utilized the most advanced heavy machinery available.
Because they wanted to be efficient.
Exactly. They brought in the massive steam shovels, the mechanized concrete batch plants, the huge steel cranes, and furthermore, these contractors hired their own highly skilled unionized workers and paid prevailing market wages.
Ah, so they weren't pulling from the relief rolls.
Right. The PWA's mandate was to build monumental infrastructure as rapidly and robustly as possible, stimulating the heavy industrial supply chains in the process. You know, steel, cement, heavy machinery.
So the contrast is incredibly stark.
It's night and day.
You've got the PWA, which is like a blockbuster Hollywood studio hiring massive production companies for these huge CGI spectacles, right?
No.
State-of-the-art tech.
That's a great analogy.
And then the WPA under Hopkins is operating entirely differently. They're more like this grassroots indie movement, funding thousands of local filmmakers with handheld cameras.
Because they had a completely decentralized project management structure, they are using direct labor, meaning the federal government is acting as the direct employer, pulling men straight off the local unemployment rolls.
Just normal guys who need a job.
Right. And because they are using relief labor, they are paying a baseline security wage, which was designed just to keep a family fed, rather than a highly competitive union wage.
And because of that direct hire model and the total reliance on hand tools, the WPA engineering designs had to adapt.
They had to. They couldn't build monoliths. They had to design infrastructure that could be built incrementally using simple, repeatable techniques that unskilled labor could master quickly.
This is why you see such a prevalence of things like cut stone retaining walls, small masonry bridges, hand-laid brick sidewalks.
Yes. These are structures that can be scaled horizontally.
What do you mean by scaled horizontally?
I mean, you can just add more men to the line to get it done faster, rather than having to scale vertically using heavy machinery.
Oh, that makes sense. You just had 50 more guys with trowels.
Exactly. They built the ordinary, humble, daily infrastructure of American life.
And the dossier makes a really brilliant point about how we perceive scale here. Because the Hoover Dam is visually overwhelming, right?
Breathtaking.
You stand at the base of it, and the sheer verticality of the concrete just makes you feel microscopic.
Yeah.
But the WPA scale was just distributed horizontally across the entire country. They didn't build one Hoover Dam. They built a million small, decentralized projects woven into thousands of communities.
It really is the architectural difference between visibility and ubiquity.
Visibility and ubiquity. I like that.
Because a massive contractor-built suspension bridge is highly visible. It defines a city's skyline. They put it on postcards.
Right.
But statistically, how many people interact with the Hoover Dam on a daily basis?
Very few.
Exactly. Compare that to 1 million miles of decentralized neighborhood roads, or the local high school athletic fields, or the storm drains under a subdivision. The WPA's infrastructure touched far more lives intimately because it was integrated directly into the fabric of the local environment.
It's everywhere.
It's literally everywhere.
Now, the dossier notes a legal restriction that I found completely counterintuitive when I first read it.
The non-competition rule.
Yes. Because if you think about it, if the PWA is handling the massive dams and the WPA is handling the local sidewalks to maximize employment, one might naturally assume the WPA could have occasionally pooled a massive workforce to build at least one or two highly profitable, high-profile projects.
Right, to generate some revenue.
Yeah. But they didn't. And the sources explain this wasn't just a matter of preference for small projects. It was a strict legal constraint known as the non-competition rule.
Yeah, this was a foundational statute of the WPA. The agency was legally forbidden from undertaking any project that would directly compete with private industry.
Which sounds so limiting.
It was. They could not underbid a private construction firm, and they could not engage in work that the free market would naturally finance and execute on its own.
And the political context of that rule is fascinating because the private sector in the 1930s was totally decimated.
They were barely holding on.
Right. Construction firms were barely surviving. So if the federal government, wielding an almost infinite pool of subsidized, cheap labor, suddenly started competing for lucrative municipal contracts.
Like building a toll bridge or a commercial high-rise.
Exactly. If they did that, they would have utterly bankrupted whatever was left of the private construction industry.
They would have wiped them out. It would have created a government monopoly on heavy construction.
And the political backlash to that would have destroyed the agency overnight.
Oh, instantly. The non-competition rule was designed as a firewall to protect the private sector from the government. It formally excluded the WPA from any lucrative, high-profile, or commercially viable projects. However, the historical consensus in the dossier suggests that this legal handicap actually became the program's greatest strength.
Which is such a weird twist.
It really is. Because it forced the WPA into the margins.
It forced them to do the profoundly unglamorous work.
Exactly the work that private capital ignores. Because private contractors follow profit margins, right?
Naturally.
There is absolutely no profit to be made in grading a secondary farm-to-market dirt road in rural Arkansas. There is no commercial return on investment in building a stone culvert in a working-class neighborhood in Ohio.
Nobody is paying a toll to cross a tiny stone culvert.
Right. Because the private market had zero financial incentive to build these things, the WPA was legally cleared to step in and do it.
The sources actually describe this as the WPA reaching into the neglected capillaries of the national infrastructure.
That's a great metaphor.
It is. The PWA was building the major arteries, the interstate highways, the massive dams, the major bridges. But the WPA was building the capillaries, the vital tiny pathways that connect a rural farm to the local town center.
And we really have to visualize what rural America looked like before 1935.
Yeah, let's talk about that because we take paved roads for granted.
We completely do. But back then, a massive percentage of the country was still navigating unimproved dirt tracks.
Just dirt.
Just dirt. And the mechanical reality of those unimproved roads was brutal.
I can imagine.
Every spring when the snow melted and the heavy rains came, these dirt roads didn't just get wet, they turned into impassable, deep trenches of mud.
So you're just stuck.
Literally stuck. Entire rural communities would be physically isolated for weeks at a time. Farmers couldn't get their crops to the railhead, doctors couldn't reach the sick, and kids couldn't even get to school.
Because the roads were just gone.
They were just mud pits. So the WPA would arrive with this army of men equipped with picks and shovels, and they would manually dig drainage ditches on either side of the track.
Hand digging miles of ditches.
Yes. And then they would use hand tools to grade the center of the road, giving it a crown so water would shed off the sides instead of pooling in the middle.
Oh.
Then to finish it, they would lay down a bed of crushed rock or gravel. And keep in mind, a lot of this rock was often crushed by hand using sledgehammers.
Just guys out there swinging sledgehammers to make gravel.
Exactly. And suddenly, because of that backbreaking work, that community is connected to the national economy year-round.
Rain or shine.
Rain or shine.
But the administrative logistics of this are just mind-boggling to me. I mean, the United States is massive.
Very big country.
How did an agency sitting in Washington, D.C. identify which specific dirt road in a specific county in Idaho needed gravel? Because they certainly didn't have satellite mapping or modern data analytics to tell them.
No, they definitely didn't. The genius of the WPA's administrative structure was its total reliance on local sponsorship.
Local sponsorship.
It operated on a decentralized partnership model. The federal government did not dictate the projects from Washington. They didn't just point at a map and say, build there.
Right.
They simply supplied the labor force and paid the wages. But a local sponsor, which could be a town council, a county board of supervisors, or a local school district, had to officially propose the project.
And the dossier highlights the skin-in-the-game requirement here, which I think is brilliant.
It was essential.
The local municipality couldn't just write a letter and request a federal handout.
No. The sponsor was required to provide the land, supply the raw materials, so the cement, the lumber, the gravel, and cover a significant percentage of the non-labor costs out of their own pockets.
So they had to pay up.
Yeah. If a town in Kansas wanted a new high school gymnasium built by the WPA, the local school board had to acquire the blueprints, purchase all the bricks, and provide the site.
Wow. And then the WPA just provided the manpower.
The WPA provided the bricklayers and the laborers to physically assemble it.
This decentralized bottom-up mechanism totally solves the knowledge problem, doesn't it?
It solves it perfectly.
Because a federal bureaucrat sitting in an office in D.C. doesn't know that a specific hillside in a specific town in Oregon washes out every spring and threatens 3 homes.
But the local town council absolutely knows.
Right. And because the town council has to spend its own scarce municipal budget to buy the concrete for the retaining wall, you can guarantee they're only sponsoring projects that the community desperately actually needs.
It completely prevents the federal government from building useless vanity projects in places that don't want them or need them.
It's a built-in filter for usefulness.
Exactly. The local sponsorship model anchored the program in reality. It ensured that the infrastructure being built was highly responsive to immediate localized needs.
Which explains the variety of stuff they build.
Right. It's why you see such a vast array of idiosyncratic projects across the country. You'll find a public swimming pool here, a beautiful stone bandshell there, a farm-to-market road somewhere else. The community dictated the demand. The federal government simply supplied the muscle.
So we have established that the WPA focused heavily on this vast network of decentralized small-scale infrastructure.
Yeah.
The capillary.
Yes.
And that was largely because of the hand tool philosophy and that strict non-competition rule. But the dossier details one monumental exception.
Oh, yeah. The big one.
A project where the WPA took all these constraints, the local sponsorship, the massive pool of unskilled labor, the reliance on hand tools, and just scaled them up to a staggering degree.
Which brings us right back to that window seat on the airplane.
Yes, the creation of LaGuardia Airport.
LaGuardia really serves as the ultimate showpiece for the agency's capabilities.
Because it breaks the mold.
Completely. If the rural gravel roads demonstrate the WPA's geographic breadth, the New York Municipal Airport, which became LaGuardia, demonstrates its sheer capacity for brute force engineering.
Let's examine the timeline and the geography here. Because it is 1937.
Okay, 1937.
Commercial aviation is finally transitioning from a novelty into a vital transportation network.
Right, we are moving past the era of those little fabric-covered biplanes just delivering the mail.
Yeah, and we're entering the era of large, metal-bodied passenger aircraft.
The serious planes.
Exactly. And New York City, which is, the financial capital of the world, is facing a severe infrastructure deficit in this area.
The geopolitical reality for New York was that they were actively losing the aviation race.
To who?
To New Jersey. The majority of commercial flights servicing the region were forced to operate out of Newark, New Jersey, simply because New York lacked a facility capable of handling the traffic.
That must have driven New York politicians crazy.
Oh, it did. The dossier actually notes this famous bit of political theater by Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia.
Oh, I love this story.
Yeah, he intentionally refused to disembark from a flight that landed in Newark because his ticket explicitly stated his destination was New York.
Just completely refused to get off the plane.
Right, and he utilized this stunt to galvanize public support for a world-class municipal airport located actually within the city limits.
So Mayor LaGuardia targets a specific location, North Beach in Queens.
Right.
But the source material describes North Beach in 1937 as a completely inadequate marginal flying field.
It was tiny. The physical footprint was far too small to accommodate the length of the runways required for modern commercial aircraft.
So the engineering problem is simple, but incredibly daunting. They need more land.
But they are in New York City. There is no empty land.
Exactly. So the only way to get more land is to build outward, right into the water of Flushing Bay and the East River.
And reclaiming land from a body of water is complex under any circumstances.
Sure.
But the specific geography of North Beach made it exceptionally difficult because they weren't just filling in a pristine sandy shallow. They had to reclaim land from tidal mudflats, which are inherently unstable.
Wismuck.
Yeah. And even more problematically, they had to build over a massive pre-existing waterfront garbage dump.
Which is just, the mechanics of building an airport runway on top of a garbage dump are staggering to think about.
It sounds like a joke, honestly.
Right. A modern DC-3 aircraft at that time weighs thousands of pounds. If you just bulldoze some dirt over rotting garbage and tidal mud, The weight of the aircraft hitting the runway will cause the whole thing to buckle and sink instantly due to subsidence.
It would just swallow the plane.
So how do they do it?
Well, the structural engineering required to stabilize that environment was immense. The workers literally had to cap the decomposing refuse.
Cap it with what?
They utilized millions of cubic yards of cinders and ash sourced directly from city incinerators.
Wait, they used incinerator ash?
Yes, the ash was physically layered and heavily compacted over the mud and the garbage. And the reason they used ash is because the jagged edges of the ash particles actually interlock when they are compressed. Yeah, it creates this rigid, lightweight structural matrix, essentially a floating raft of ash that won't sink deeply into the silt below.
That is incredibly clever.
It is. Only after establishing that stable matrix could they cap it with soil and pour the concrete runways on top.
And the most mind-bending aspect of this is the methodology they used to do it. Because in modern construction, a land reclamation project of this magnitude would require a fleet of massive dump trucks, hydraulic excavators, floating dredges, the works.
Right, massive machinery.
But this is a WPA project.
Yeah.
They are strictly adhering to Harry Hopkins' mandate of maximizing human employment over mechanical efficiency. How do you execute the massive earth-moving requirements of land reclamation using hand tools?
You deploy a literal army of laborers.
An army.
Because land reclamation involves moving such a massive volume of material, it was actually the ideal project for a program desperate to employ thousands of unskilled workers simultaneously.
Because you just need bodies to move dirt.
Exactly. The heavy machinery was minimized. Instead, the WPA orchestrated thousands of men with shovels and wheelbarrows to move the ash and fill, yard by yard.
Wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow.
Yeah. It was grueling, intensely physical, back-breaking work in a highly unpleasant environment. I mean, you are dealing with mud, ash, and refuse.
The smell must have been unbelievable.
I can't even imagine.
And the statistics in the dossier regarding the workforce density on this site are almost difficult to process.
They are massive.
At the peak of construction, around November of 1938, the project employed roughly 11,500 WPA workers simultaneously.
Just consider the sheer logistical complexity of that. Managing a workforce of 11,500 men on a single active construction site without modern communication technology.
No walkie-talkies, no cell phones.
Nothing. The administrative overhead of organizing the shifts, managing the supply chains of raw materials so the men always had work to do, and even just providing basic sanitation and drinking water for that many laborers.
Just getting them water would be a full-time operation.
It's a monumental feat of project management. The site would have looked like a human conveyor belt, just this endless stream of wheelbarrows and hand tools physically reshaping the coastline.
And the financial commitment reflects that scale, too. The total cost of the project eventually reached roughly $29 million.
In 1930s currency, which is huge.
Massive. And adhering to the local sponsorship rules we discussed earlier, the federal government didn't simply write a blank check for this.
No, Mayor LaGuardia had to politically maneuver to secure millions in municipal funding to partner with the federal WPA allocations.
It was a massive gamble of city resources.
It really was. But the gamble yielded an incredible return. The speed of the construction, despite the total reliance on manual labor, is a testament to the sheer volume of manpower they deployed.
Because they just threw so many guys at it.
Right. The airport was formally dedicated on October 15, 1939, and it opened for commercial traffic just weeks later on December 10, 1939.
Which is incredibly fast for an airport.
Very fast. And the WPA didn't just build a functional runway, they built an architectural masterpiece.
The dossier specifically highlights the Marine Air Terminal.
Yes, which is still standing and operational today, by the way.
I've actually flown out of it. It's beautiful.
It really is. The Marine Air Terminal is one of the most celebrated examples of Art Deco architecture in the whole country. It was designed specifically to service the Pan American flying boats.
Oh, those massive seaplanes.
Yeah, the luxurious ones that were pioneering transatlantic commercial flight. The terminal was built with these stunning terracotta details and intricate murals meant to evoke the sleek modernity and romance of early aviation.
And the juxtaposition there is just incredible to me.
Yes, so.
You have this terminal designed to service the most technologically advanced, glamorous industry of the era, international flying boats for the wealthy, and the entire physical foundation it rests upon was constructed through the most primitive, grueling manual labor imaginable.
It's a wild contrast. Guys with wheelbarrows building the foundation for the future of flight.
Exactly. And by successfully executing LaGuardia, The WPA basically validated their entire model, didn't they?
They absolutely did. They proved that direct, unmechanized relief labor could produce world-class heavy infrastructure if the project management was rigorous enough.
And while LaGuardia was obviously the most visible crown jewel, the dossier makes it clear that this aviation initiative was a national strategy.
It wasn't just a New York thing.
Right. The WPA applied this model to aviation infrastructure across the entire country, building or improving approximately 800 airports and landing fields.
They essentially constructed the physical runway network that permitted commercial aviation to evolve into a mass transit reality in the United States.
Without them, the airline industry would have been set back decades.
Easily.
Okay, so as we move chronologically to the dossier, we hit 1939. LaGuardia opens, commercial aviation expands. Yeah. But the administrative structure of the New Deal starts shifting.
Yeah, the WPA undergoes a slight rebranding.
Tell me about that.
So in 1939, the federal government reorganized its public works programs. The WPA was folded under a new umbrella entity called the Federal Works Agency.
Okay.
And during this reorganization, its name was slightly altered from the Works Progress Administration to the Work Projects Administration. The acronym, WPA, remained identical, and the labor-intensive infrastructure projects just continued under the new administrative hierarchy.
However, the macroeconomic conditions that created the necessity for the WPA in the first place were rapidly changing.
Right.
As the 1930s end, the global geopolitical situation drastically deteriorates. World War II erupts in Europe.
And the outbreak of the war fundamentally altered the economic equation of the United States.
Even before Pearl Harbor, right?
Yes, even before direct American military intervention, the nation began a massive industrial mobilization to supply the Allied powers.
The arsenal of democracy.
Exactly. The defense plants ramped up to run 3 shifts a day. Factories started producing tanks, aircraft, and munitions at a completely unprecedented scale.
And because of that, the structural unemployment crisis that had paralyzed the country for a decade essentially evaporates.
Overnight, almost. Suddenly, you don't have millions of idle men desperate for a WPA security wage.
Right.
The private industrial sector is desperate for labor, and simultaneously, millions of men are enlisting or being drafted into the armed forces.
So the labor pool just dries up.
It completely drains. The wartime economy achieved what the New Deal interventions could not do entirely on their own. It permanently ended the Great Depression.
And so the primary mission of the WPA, providing emergency relief employment to prevent mass starvation, was no longer required by the market.
Right. Consequently, the agency's funding and labor pool steadily diminished over the next few years.
And then in 1943, the WPA was officially and completely liquidated.
Liquidated.
Which is such a clinical, bureaucratic term for the termination of an agency that employed over 8 million individual people over its lifespan.
It's a bit cold, yeah.
And an agency that physically reshaped the surface of the North American continent. Let's look at the final scorecard provided in the source material, because the cumulative output of those 8 years is just staggering.
It really is. The final national tally includes the construction or improvement of over 650,000 miles of roadways.
Wow.
They delivered roughly 800 airports and landing fields, and they completed an estimated 1.4 million individual distinct projects ranging from rural schools to urban storm drain systems.
1.4 million projects. Now, I want to dive into a specific discrepancy in the dossier regarding the bridge count.
Ah, the Great Bridge Debate.
Yeah, because it highlights the complexity of historical infrastructure data. Early on, we cited the number of bridges built or rebuilt as roughly 78,000.
Right.
But the sources note that depending on which historical archive you consult, that number fluctuates wildly. Some conservative estimates put the number of WPA bridges around 10,000.
And others cite figures as high as 78,000.
Right. So how does the historical record lose track of tens of thousands of bridges? I mean, a bridge is a big piece of concrete. It's not like you just misplace it.
Right. It isn't a failure of record keeping. It is a fundamental debate over civil engineering definitions.
Okay, explain that.
The variance entirely depends on how the historian or the contemporary auditor defined the term bridge versus a culvert or a grade separation structure.
What is the mechanical difference there? Because if a road goes over a gap and water flows underneath it, I think most people would call that a bridge.
In colloquial terms, yes, absolutely. But in engineering terms, the distinction is very specific. A traditional bridge spans an open gap transferring the load of the roadway to abutments or piers at either end.
Okay.
A culvert, however, is a structure completely enclosed by soil designed to allow water to flow under a roadway.
Ah, I see.
And the WPA built tens of thousands of massive cut stone arch culverts over rural creeks. So if a local WPA administrator in 1937 recorded a 20-foot stone arch as a heavy culvert,
A strict modern historian might exclude it from the bridge tally.
exactly, dropping the aggregate number closer to 10,000.
But if you include all the masonry arches, the heavy box culverts, the viaducts, and the grade separations that lifted rural roads over railroad tracks, the count expands dramatically.
Precisely. The 78,000 figure is a highly defensible, inclusive count that captures the true scale of the WPA's work on road crossings.
It reflects the sheer number of times these hand labor crews had to engineer a structural solution to allow a road to safely cross an obstacle.
Exactly.
And that brings us full circle, right back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
Because whether you are driving to the grocery store, walking through a local park, or flying cross-country, you are interacting with this physical legacy. The modern commuter still rides on a foundation of 1930s labor every single day.
But there is a paradox here, one that Nick McKenzie highlights in the dossier.
Right.
Despite the staggering statistics, 650,000 miles of road, 78,000 bridges, 800 airports, this legacy remains almost entirely invisible to the modern public. We don't see it.
Why is that?
The invisibility is a direct result of the nature of the infrastructure they built. Consider the contrast with the PWA again.
Okay, the giant dams.
Right. The PWA built the Hoover Dam. It is a monument. It has massive bronze plaques. People literally travel across the country specifically to look at it and take pictures of it.
Sure.
But the WPA built a retaining wall holding back a hillside in a suburban neighborhood. They laid down the gravel base for a county road. They poured the concrete for a municipal sidewalk.
Those structures do not demand attention.
No, they're the background noise of modern civilization.
The sheer ubiquity of the work acts as a form of camouflage.
That's beautifully put. When foundational infrastructure operates perfectly, it becomes invisible. You only notice a storm drain when it backs up and floods the street.
Right.
You only notice a bridge when it is structurally deficient and closed to traffic. The WPA built the ordinary, essential components of daily life so solidly and in such massive, decentralized quantities that they simply blended into the natural environment.
They didn't build monuments to their own engineering prowess. They built the functional ground we stand on.
Exactly.
Let's summarize the mechanical and historical journey we've taken to these sources today.
It's been quite a ride.
We started with the extreme economic desperation of 1935 and Harry Hopkins' philosophy that human dignity requires paid labor, not a dole.
The psychological need to work.
Right. We explored the deliberate, calculated inefficiency of that philosophy, banishing the motorized grader to ensure 50 men with shovels could earn a paycheck.
Because keeping them fed was more important than speed.
We broke down the critical distinction between the massive contractor-driven monuments of the PWA and the decentralized direct labor approach of the WPA.
The blockbuster versus the indie film.
Yeah. We examined how the non-competition rule legally forced the WPA into the neglected rural capillaries of the country, utilizing a local sponsorship model to ensure every single project met an immediate community need.
The skin in the game.
Exactly. And we traced that hand tool methodology all the way to the shores of Queens, where 11,500 workers manually stabilized a garbage dump with incinerator ash to build LaGuardia Airport, proving that relief labor could execute on a monumental scale.
It is a remarkable narrative of engineering driven by social necessity. They engineered a system to absorb millions of unemployed citizens and converted that raw, unskilled human energy into a permanent physical dividend for the nation.
The sources leave us with a fascinating historical perspective on the value of labor, but they also provoke a completely new thought about where we are heading today.
Oh, this is a great point.
Because in the 1930s, the WPA viewed human employment as the ultimate social good. They actively displaced efficient machines to ensure humans had a task to perform.
Right.
Today, our entire economic model is the exact inverse. We view maximum efficiency as the ultimate good, and we are aggressively developing artificial intelligence and automation to displace human labor entirely.
Right, the AI revolution.
So it makes you wonder, if we succeed in building a future where machines and algorithms can execute all the essential work flawlessly and cheaply, what happens to the human need for purpose?
Wow.
Will a future society, stripped of the necessity to labor, have to invent a new digital WPA? Not to build infrastructure, but simply to provide humans with the psychological dignity of having something meaningful to do?
That is a profound question. We are engineering the friction out of work, but we may be engineering the purpose out of it too.
Next time you fly into LaGuardia, look out the window at the water rushing past. Think about the rotting garbage, the incinerator ash, and the thousands of wheelbarrows. And think about the 650,000 miles of hand-graded roads that brought us to exactly where we are today.